Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ask a Property Manager. This is episode number 36. Today is September 2nd, 2020. Coming to you from Studio 2.0 here at the Own Buffalo Studios. I'm Andrew Schultz, principal broker of Own Buffalo, Inc. And on today's show, we're going to be looking at some updates to the eviction moratoriums in California and in Nevada, as well as federally. Some new information that was brought to us. Actually, I just found about it this morning, so very fresh information to bring to you this morning. We're also going to be talking about cash for keys and answering some other questions from landlords around the country. Before we jump into that, we're going to plug our social media. New episodes of Ask a Property Manager drop every Wednesday, 10 a.m. Eastern, live here on Facebook, facebook.com/Buffalo Foreclosed Homes. You can also catch replays on Facebook as well as on our YouTube page. You can get a link to that over at our website at ownbuffalo.com. Instagram.com/ownbuffalo. We do post some different stuff on Instagram that you won't find on Facebook or YouTube. A little bit different type of content over there, so it's worth checking out as well. Last but not least, we're going to drop over to our desktop. Don't forget that we have, excuse me. Sorry about that. Don't forget that we have consultations available, 30-minute consultations available via phone or Zoom. We have a couple of slots open for this week. We also have a couple of slots open still for next week, so that is definitely something that you can take advantage of. You guys are going to get to see the behind the scenes here again. I'm going to jump back to Rent Prep, the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm just moving a couple things around on my screen here so that we don't have to show you guys my streaming setup. There we go. All right, new episode of the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast drops tomorrow. We're going to be discussing the headaches that come from renting to friends and family. It's a really interesting episode. It definitely helps to put a lot of things in perspective. If that's something that you're considering doing, definitely check that out over at rentprep.com/podcast. You can also pick that up anywhere podcasts are heard. And new episodes of the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast do drop every Thursday morning, so you can grab that everywhere podcasts are heard. All right, so we are going to jump right into it here. I'm going to switch over to desktop. And we're going to start with this article out of, this article from NPR. This was published yesterday on September 1st. California OK's extension of COVID-19 moratorium on evictions. And the way I'm going to be doing this is I've got a few sections of the article highlighted. We're going to be reading a chunk of it, and we'll kind of move through things the way that we typically do. California Governor Newsom has signed a 5-month extension to the measures aimed at preventing millions of tenants from being thrown out of housing for missing rent payments due to hardships caused by the coronavirus pandemic. Newsom signed Assembly Bill 3088 into law late Monday after last-minute wrangling in the California legislature that tried to balance the demands of both landlord and tenant advocacy groups. We're going to skip down a little bit here. In March, Newsom issued an executive order placing a moratorium on evictions throughout the end of May. He twice extended the order, which California's Judicial Council voted last month to end on September 1st. Under the new legislation, which goes into effect immediately, tenants who pay at least 25% of their rent from September 1 to January 31st will be protected from eviction. However, those who fail to meet the minimum rent payment could be removed beginning February 1st. And I did a little bit more digging into this. Essentially, what they're talking about is rents from September 1 through January 31, as long as the tenant can make a portion of the rent payment, a 25% of the rent payment, that will help them to, that'll basically prevent them from getting evicted. The extension also gives tenants a reprieve on unpaid rent between March and August, but allows landlords to sue for back rent during that period beginning March 2021. Scrolling down a little bit here, the California Apartment Association, which had opposed the earlier proposal, backs the bill signed by Newsom but said more help is needed. To truly address the crisis, the federal government needs to step up, Deborah Carlton, the association's executive vice president of state public affairs, said in a statement. COVID-impacted renters need financial assistance from the feds so that they can pay their rent. Otherwise, renters will be hard-pressed to pay the rent that's accumulated, and housing providers will go out of business. Scrolling down a little bit further here, it looks like that's the main portion of what I wanted to pull out of this article. So essentially what's happening here is California has extended their eviction moratorium now through January 31st. I'm going to move over to this article from nolo.com, Nolo.com. If you're not familiar with Nolo, they're a really good resource if you're looking to get some basic legal information on a variety of different topics. It's a pretty decent website. They've actually had a lot of really great coverage of eviction moratoriums and things like that throughout the pandemic. And this is coming from their website. This has already been updated with the new information that's been passed in that relief bill that California, I think it was 3088, yes. Let's see here. So this is a stopgap short-term eviction protection through 131-20. I think that's actually supposed to say 2021. Landlords can again evict tenants for reasons other than non-payment, like nuisance violations, starting on 10/5/20. The statutory 3-day notice period for failure to pay rent is now extended to 15 days. So pretty similar to what we have here in the state of New York, where our 3-day notice went to a 15-day back in June of last year when those laws changed. That's now taken place in California as well. Tenants who missed rent payments from March through August of 2020. So that's basically everything in the past, essentially. Because of COVID-19 illness or lost income, financial distress cannot be evicted for failure to pay rent during that period. Again, very similar to what we have here in the state of New York. If they provide landlords with a declaration of COVID-19 related financial distress within the 15-day notice period. Tenants who earn more than 130% of the local median income must also provide proof of that financial distress upon request. Again, very similar to New York. Past due rent will be converted into consumer debt, similar to credit card or personal loans, which landlords must collect in small claims court. Again, very similar to New York. I believe I mentioned when everything passed in New York that this would probably be the stepping stone for other states to do the same, and that's kind of what it looks like is happening here. From 9/1/20 on, okay, so that's from yesterday on, tenants who can't pay some or all of the rent going forward because of COVID-19 illness or lost income or financial distress cannot be evicted if they provide the landlords with the declaration page within 15-day notice period and pay a minimum of 25% of their total rent due. So they don't have the ability to just not pay everything. They have to at least make an attempt by paying at least a quarter of the rent. 25% can be paid over time or in a lump sum at any time up to 1/31/21. That's less than ideal. The tenants who fail to pay the 25% can be evicted starting 2/1/21. The ongoing unpaid rents convert to consumer debt. So the way I'm understanding that, or interpreting it anyway, is that if they want to, if they're going to make the 25% payment in September, October, November, December, and January, they could technically wait and make that entire 25% payment for all 5 months in January, is kind of the way I'm reading that. All past due rents must be paid by 1/31/21. Landlords can start collecting unpaid rents on 3/1/21 in small claims court. However, that debt will not show up on tenant credit reports. Landlords who resort to self-help evictions or who retaliate against unqualified tenants are subject to damages. In cities and counties with a local ordinance in effect, the local ordinance rather than a relief act applies. So if you're in California and you have a local ordinance or maybe a county ordinance or something like that, that would take precedence over the state. So that's what's going on in California, very similar to what we saw here in New York. Now we're going to move on to the state of Nevada. This is coming out of the Reno Gazette-Journal. This was published on August 31st, which I believe was Monday. Yes, that's correct. Whoops. Back up here. Sisolak extending Nevada eviction moratorium. Governor Steve Sisolak is extending the Nevada moratorium on evictions through mid-October amid mounting fears over an expected onslaught of landlord-tenant disputes that could swamp the state's court system and leave thousands of residents without a home. His office on Monday said the evictions embargo, first announced in March and set to expire on Tuesday, would be extended for 45 days. The extension will allow the following to happen over the next month and a half. 1, counties can pay out short-term rental assistance to landlords. 2, courts will get more time to implement new residential eviction mediation programs. And 3, the state can make progress on reducing the backlog of unemployment claims. Scrolling down a little bit here, Nevada has earmarked an additional $10 million in federal relief funds for short-term rental assistance. He announced Monday at the press conference I'm confident in the next 45 days, all of the various agencies and organizations will work together as fast as possible to make sure that these programs are up and running to help Nevada's renters and landlords continue to navigate these unprecedented times, stay healthy and safe in the midst of this pandemic. Hours ahead of the announcement, Nevada Treasurer's Office confirmed it was fast running out of relief funds and would have to put immediate pause on new rental assistance requests received in Southern Nevada. More than 25,000 applicants remain in the program's pipeline, according to a spokesman for the Treasurer's Office. Let's see here. Some of the researchers said Nevada would need at least $260 million to keep up with the pent-up demand for rental assistance. The National Low Income Housing Coalition suggests that number is closer to $800 million. So essentially, they're throwing $10 million. Where is that? Up here. I know I saw it. There it is. $10 million at a problem that needs somewhere between $260 and $800 million thrown at it. Obviously, things are kind of rough in Nevada, with Las Vegas and Reno being two of the major cities in Nevada, both of which basically survive and thrive on tourism. I mean, we were in Vegas for a conference just before everything kind of broke wide open here. And, you know, seeing footage 2 weeks after I was in Las Vegas of the entire strip shut down with no one walking around or anything, it was eerie. It was one of the more eerie things that I think I've ever seen, really. Definitely weird to see that. Nevada is very heavily impacted when it comes to this particular situation because there is no real recreational travel right now. No one's going to Las Vegas and Reno to do the gambling that they would normally be doing. You know, a lot of conferences and things like that have a tendency to be in Las Vegas because of its semi-central location and the fact that it's kind of turned into a resort town over the years. Obviously, none of that's going on. It's quite the mess. This is actually the press release from the governor's website. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but just a couple things I wanted to point out. Extending the moratorium on certain residential evictions for 45 days through October 14th, 2020 at 11:59. Today's directive does not change any tenant's obligation to pay rent. Nevada landlords have had a seat at the table. Nevada landlords have had a seat at the table toward helping us all move forward out of this pandemic for a better Nevada. And then this is actually the text of the speech. And again, it reiterates the 45-day extension. It also mentions again the $10 million in relief funds, which obviously we now understand is not going to be anywhere near enough. But the unemployment backlog is one reason why I'm extending the eviction moratorium. We do not want Nevadians, I don't know if I pronounced that right, getting evicted while awaiting a determination of their case. And the state will do all it can to get a resolution to outstanding claims. So there you have it. Nevada has extended their eviction moratorium as well. This last article we're going to talk about, I'm going to have to do a more in-depth video on this probably later this week. I literally just heard about this morning, so it's very fresh to me. I don't have all of the details on it. I don't really have much of any of the details on it. I do have a full copy of the bill text, which is 37 pages, and I'm going to spend some time reading through so that I can get a better feel for this. So this is coming out of NBC News, published probably this morning, late last night, updated this morning at 9:02 a.m. Trump gives CDC broad authority to stop evictions during the pandemic. The order comes as House Democrats have been at loggerheads with the White House over the next coronavirus relief package. I'm not going to read this entire article, as I'm just kind of trying to bring you up to speed. I will be doing a more in-depth video on this later this week. President Trump has signed an executive order on Tuesday giving the CDC broad authority to temporarily halt evictions during the COVID-19 pandemic. Under the executive order, the CDC will use its power under federal law to prevent any landlord who has the legal right to evict a tenant from doing so, prevent the spread of COVID-19. It also provides assistance to property owners as well as tenants. Scrolling down now, today's announcement means that people struggling to pay rent due to the coronavirus will not have to worry about being evicted and risk further spreading of or exposure to the disease during the economic hardship, or due to economic hardship, excuse me. The administration has also made funds available to alleviate any economic impact to tenants, landlords, and property owners. The funds include billions allocated from the massive $2 trillion CARES Act Congress passed earlier this year, as well as other government agencies such as the Treasury and Housing and Urban Development. The White House said. A senior administration official told NBC News on Tuesday that the order goes beyond the CARE Act coverage by including all renters and homeowners instead of those living in federally subsidized housing or homeowners with federally backed mortgages. If you don't remember the CARES Act, there was stipulation in there that it was basically tied to if you were receiving some kind of a federal benefit on behalf of your tenant, or if your property was financed using a federally backed mortgage. So if you owned a property outright, if you were not accepting any Section 8, for instance, or if you maybe had like a private financier or something like that, you weren't going through a traditional bank, you may not have had any of the restrictions that were placed under that moratorium. The order, however, has caveats. Those covered include all persons who would have been eligible for an economic impact payment, individuals who make $99,000 a year or less, or a married couple making $198,000 a year or less. Like the stimulus payments, many Americans could be left out, such as immigrants without Social Security numbers, high earners who might have lost their jobs, and seniors who live with their children and are claimed as dependents, among others. The order stipulates that residents seeking this protection must show that they have had financial hardships due to COVID-19, made an actual effort to seek government assistance to make their rental payments, and demonstrate that they would likely become homeless or move into crowded housing if they are evicted. Also, those who would benefit from this order are still obligated to pay accrued rent in accordance with their lease or contract, the official said, and landlords can pursue evictions against criminals and tenants threatening the health and safety of residents or damaging property. So that's good news. I do like to see the carve out there that tenants who are being problematic in a building. I know of another landlord here in the Western New York region who has a tenant who is dealing drugs out of the apartment, and he hasn't been able to get the tenant out because of everything that's going on. So hopefully he'll have some recourse there. So there you have it. That is what I know about the new federal moratorium. I'm going to try to get some more information up on that by the end of this week. Stay tuned to our Facebook and YouTube pages for more info on that. Let's jump right into our landlord questions here. We're going to start with this, which is on including utilities in the rent. So the question, it all came from the Rent Prep for Landlords Facebook group, by the way. That's a great resource if you're not tied into it already. Facebook.com/groups/rentprep. Just shy of 12,000 members in that group right now. Free resource that you can tie into, ask questions of other landlords all over the country, and get some interesting perspectives. Definitely check that out if you haven't already. So back to the question at hand here. What is your opinion on including utilities in the rent? I think it makes it very attractive to potential renters, but I would like to know what you all think. If you don't, that's fine. If you do, how much do you charge for rent on top? What are the stipulations if you do include the utilities? So we actually try not to include utilities whenever possible because it's almost a guarantee that that's going to get abused. You'll find open windows in the middle of winter, which, I mean, it gets cold here in Buffalo. We are a cold weather climate when it comes to winter. You'll have your heat on full blast because you're paying for it as a landlord, and you'll drive by and see tenants have windows open. It's one of those things that's very easy to get abused. Another thing that I've seen that gets abused very, very frequently is if you have like a free washer and dryer available in a basement for tenants to use. A lot of times you'll find that there will be friends and family coming over to do wash and dry at their place because now they don't have to pay for it. So something to keep in mind when it comes to that as well. One thing I will mention is that in our area, it's very common to include water as part of the rent. I actually recommend even to our single family clients that they continue to include the water, because if a water bill goes unpaid here, it becomes a lien against the property, and you could actually lose your property at a tax auction over something as silly as an unpaid water bill. So we always recommend keeping the water in the landlord's name, even if it's back billed to the tenant in a single family. Keep it coming to the landlord so that way you know that that bill always gets paid, and then seek reimbursement from the tenant. What we've done when factoring in for like water bills, in the city of Buffalo, for instance, water gets billed on a quarterly basis, and it's usually pretty static. You kind of have a pretty good idea as to what your bills are going to be, and they can provide you with a history as well to show you what your usage is on a quarterly basis. Essentially what we do most water bills on like a duplex in the city of Buffalo, you're going to find is going to be somewhere between like 600 and 800 over the course of the year. We factor that in when we do our deal analysis and just make sure that the property is still cash flow positive after all of the expenses are factored in. Another method you could do is if you were, for instance, including water, but back billing it to the tenant. I'm sorry, if you were paying for water and then back billing it to the tenant, you could take that quarterly bill and divide it by 3 or something like that, so that you're always getting, some sort of a sum for water on a monthly basis. Whenever possible, we just try not to include utilities. Just makes life that much easier for everybody involved. One thing I will mention is that some states are a lot more picky about this than others, and some won't let you regulate a utility, if you will. So make sure that you're not crossing a line into regulating a utility, which would wind up with all kinds of additional headaches that you weren't even planning on. So definitely something to keep in mind. Refinancing a rental property. This is unrelated to rental properties, but properties in general. I guess I tagged it refinancing a rental property anyway. Has anyone had a really bad refi experience? I'm in the process right now with the bank since March, refinancing my primary residence. Should not take this long. I'm at my wit's end. They keep asking for docs, saying it's the last time, only to ask for new things, etc., etc. I'm ready to walk away and wondering if anyone has had a bad experience and what the process was for backing out. I've had my share of this refi. This is my 4th one. I'm not a new kid on the block, and at this point, I have developed anxiety with this bank. Change banks. Some banks are not interested in doing refinance business right now. Banks are basically being very, very picky about what they're funding right now because they understand that on the back end of all of this pandemic, they're going to be dealing with a massive number of foreclosures. So they're being very, very, very particular about the deals that they pick and choose to finance right now. And you can see that they've already started changing their guidelines and requirements for approval in a lot of instances and on a lot of different products. So that's something to take note of. Banks are in a position right now where if they don't have to lend on something, they may choose not to lend on it. I know another property manager who doesn't live in New York. He lives down in the southern states. He was actually waiting on a construction loan, and same thing, months and months and months waiting on this construction loan, submitting the same documents over and over and over again. And he finally got fed up and decided to just walk away from that bank and go another route to get the property, to get the construction moving forward on his property. It's, banks are definitely being very picky right now. And if you're not having any success and you're not getting the answers that you want, I would personally say move on, find another bank that is doing refis. And I would think that most banks would be all about refi business right now. It seems to me that there's a lot of refis going on out there. Just find another bank. If you're still dealing with this since March, it's obviously an issue with this bank. Assuming you're qualified, well qualified and everything else, I would just go find another bank. Communicating with tenants. So this is an interesting one. How do you tell your tenants to communicate property issues with you? We have 10 tenants that have not had any issues until we rented to a lady in April. It's just me and my husband, and we hire out work as needed. My husband can do most things if he has the time. I'm usually the one dealing with tenants, signing leases, reporting issues, etc. We both work full-time, but I usually can answer a call during the day. This lady calls almost every week and will have issues monthly. She works from home, and I can tell she wants to be friends, but I don't have time for that. How do you set your boundaries with tenants when they want more without being rude? Sorry for so long. This is pretty straightforward. I had this exact same issue when I first got started in property management. Every single tenant had my direct cell phone number and could access me like 24/7, 365, and it quickly led to burnout. It got to a point, especially as we started taking on more and more doors, where I quickly realized that having everybody calling my cell phone and having my cell phone ring 24/7 was just not going to be a viable option. So we did a couple of different things. The first thing we did was moved that cell phone number that I was using. That actually ended up becoming our office number, our first office number. And it was moved over to, at the time, a Google Voice number, which was free. It still is free, voice.google.com. You can get a second cell phone number that ties to your existing cell phone and just works off of the Google Voice app. That would be my first recommendation would be get a separate phone number just for dealing with your business issues. So it keeps your personal cell phone numbers separate. The other nice thing about a Google Voice number, in addition to it being free, you get your own voicemail, a separate voicemail box. It'll actually send you a transcription of a voicemail if somebody calls and leaves you one. It's actually pretty accurate. It's been getting better. It gives you a totally separate texting inbox so that your text messages with tenants is separate from anything on your personal phone. You can send and receive photos, which is good. That's actually pretty great with the Google Voice number. I think I've mentioned it's free a couple of times. I'll reiterate that again. It's free. It's a nice little service, and it helps you to kind of separate everything. You can also set a do not disturb on that, which is really nice. So if you don't want to be bothered after 8 p.m., between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m., for instance, you can actually set it up to automatically go into a do not disturb mode, where it'll automatically send the tenant directly to voicemail during that time frame or whatever the case may be. So there's definitely options out there to help you separate things from, your personal cell phone so that you could start treating it a little bit more as a business. I would definitely recommend getting a separate email address, maybe a separate PO box, depending on how you're set up. Make sure that things are just separated, and then communicate with your tenants as to how to communicate with you. Let them know that you are available between, we'll use 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. or whatever. Let them know if it's not an emergency, they can send a text. If it is an emergency, they need to call because that's something that you don't want to miss, whatever the case may be. Set up a policy and make sure that your tenants are adhering to the policy. And I think that you'll find that it's pretty straightforward. With 10 tenants, it shouldn't be too bad to communicate this out to everybody on just a simple one-page letter and get your point across so that you are taking care of yourself and also taking care of your tenants while still maintaining a little bit of a personal life and hopefully not going insane in the meantime. Cash for keys. In 30 days, I'm closing on a distressed property with non-paying tenants. I'm really not trying to do the whole court proceedings thing, especially now, and I need to get them out. What would you do? Would you do cash for keys? And if so, what are your best tricks? So cash for keys, if you're not familiar with cash for keys, essentially what it is you give someone cash, they give you possession of the property back. It's that simple. It's done in lieu of an eviction a lot of times. I was first introduced to cash for keys when I was doing REO foreclosure properties. We had a couple of banks that would offer people who were living in properties a cash for keys in lieu of having to go through a full-on, eviction process or something like that as part of the foreclosure proceeding. Generally speaking, the way that the bank would require it to work would be they would offer a certain sum of money if the person who was living in the property was out by X date and left the property in broom clean condition and took all of their stuff out of it and blah, 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 blah. There were a few different little caveats that applied to it. I took that same mentality and we have done it a few times with tenants. It is super popular right now, especially with everything going on and not being able to get into courts to do evictions and this and that. It's an excellent idea if you can get it to work. But you definitely need to understand this thing in its entirety before you jump into it. And the first thing you need to understand is this even legal to do in your state? Some states won't let you do it. Speak to a landlord-tenant attorney who understands the ins and outs of how to do a cash for keys. They should have some kind of an agreement that they can provide you with as well that will protect you. And basically, it ensures that the occupant is truly releasing the possession of the property back to you. And that in turn, you were giving them, X sum of dollars or whatever the case may be. But you want to make sure that agreement is, ironclad enough that the conveyance of the possession of that is definitely coming back to you. If you screw up a cash for keys agreement, you wind up out of cash and still have somebody in your property that you don't want in there. So this is one of those things. Don't just go and download a template online. Speak to an attorney who has some experience in this and make sure you're doing it the right way. Some people are completely against cash for keys, and I actually used to be part of that school of thought. I thought that it was ridiculous to give a tenant, money to walk away when they already owe, thousands in rent and damages and whatever. And then I realized that, at the end of the day, I'd rather get possession of the asset back so that we can put a paying tenant in there. So if you can get a non-paying tenant to move out by doing a cash for keys, I understand that you have to swallow your pride. You know, there's a certain amount of nobody wants to give somebody money when they know that that person owes them for rent or maybe some damages or whatever. No one wants to do that. But this is what's going to get you back in possession of your property, get you back in control of your asset, and get that asset producing revenue for you again as quickly as possible. So that's my take on it. You know, swallow your pride, get it done if that's what it takes to get it done and get it back in your possession. So that's my stance on it. The one thing I would state is whatever agreement you're using, make sure that it's very clear on what's expected of the occupant on the way out the door. If they need to make sure all of their stuff is out, you know, if they need to make sure the place is in broom clean condition, make sure that that's understood well in advance. And then when you show up on that day to make sure that they're out and to do the cash for keys, everybody's on the same page. So that's how I would handle that. That pretty much wraps things up for us here today. Thank you all so much for watching. We love producing Ask a Property Manager, and you can definitely help us to improve. Drop a question in the comments either on Facebook or YouTube, and your question may be answered in an upcoming episode. If you enjoyed this content or if we brought some value to your day, please do us a favor and hit that thumbs up button. YouTube and Facebook both push videos based on community feedback, so every like, comment, subscribe, and share helps us to grow and reach more people. Next week's episode will be on Wednesday, September 9th at 10 a.m. Eastern. We're going to be back with another show you won't want to miss. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.